All right. I think we're ready to start under duress. Let me just check and make sure that we're online. We are. We've had a series of strange things, and so I apologize to everyone out there on the internet and to everyone here at Soul Food. Nice turnout tonight. Nice to see you all. It must be that Mercury retro. Wait. You know, I hate it when you can't blame. I hate it when you can't blame shit on astrology.
Me too.
So welcome everyone to Soul Food, and welcome for those of you online. I apologize for our delayed start, but we are short a connector, and the connectors that we have didn't work. So for those of you here at Soul Food, you won't be able to see the screen because we don't have a projector. For those of you online, though, I think we'll be fine, but we'll make it work. I really didn't have that much I needed to project tonight anyhow, so we will do the best with what we have. It's
a lot.
It's a lot out there. And for those of you who have watched my monthly forecast, you know that it's a lot out there. The uncertainty, the craziness, the instability that we're feeling right now is right on schedule. And although it may not feel good, I think it was, well, I had this quote in my forecast this month, but it is, great change is always preceded by chaos. And we are kind of on the edge of great change. And we have been, we can look at cycles from lots of different time sequences, from different time spectrum spreads. I still don't have the right word. What's that?
Scales.
Time scales, that's it, as opposed to fish scales. They're two different things. When we look at it just from the standpoint of September, October, November, we are in the midst of a dynamic change. When we look at what's going on now from a standpoint of 2019, 2020, 2021, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we are in a dynamic period of change. But when we look at this from a time scale of the early 1960s, let's say even 58, 59, 60, 61, 1958 through 61, all the way through 2030, we are in the midst of a huge, unstable, chaotic change that is really difficult to understand when you're in the middle of change. I used to have these ongoing discussions with an astrologer friend of mine that the question was this: if you are in the midst of a major Pluto transit, and for those of, how many first timers are here tonight? Yeah, a handful. And how many of you would consider yourself either real beginners or, when it comes to astrology? Okay. All right. So I don't want to lose you folks. So Pluto, as you may know, when it was discovered in the early 1930s, was considered to be the planet related to death. It was Pluto, the lord of the underworld, lord of the hell realms. Pluto was discovered at the time of the rise of mass fascism that preceded World War II. And Pluto was associated with this incredible, the rise of Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini, and the United States was in a Great Depression, and it was not an easy time on planet Earth. And all planets, when they are discovered, all the more newly discovered planets since Uranus in the 18th century, and then Neptune in the 19th century, and then Pluto in the early 20th century, and then other objects and things, whether you call them planets or other things, that have been discovered even more recently. When every planet is discovered, it's considered to be the worst thing ever until we integrate it into our consciousness. And astrologically, as we discover new things out there, they correspond with new things in here. There's the old saying that comes from the Emerald Tablet, which was allegedly written by the Egyptian version of Mercury, or Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the 3 times great, also known as Thoth or Thoth, who is the Egyptian giver of truth. He wrote, allegedly, the above is as, no, let me get this right. Originally, it was translated as the below is as the above. In other words, there's this relationship between here on Earth and whatever's up there. But the rest of that line in the original tablet is the in is the same as the out, or the within is the same as the without. It doesn't mean that one is a reflection of the other. It means that the two are one and the same. It's not a duality, it's a unity. We perceive it as two different things because our consciousness is basically riding some wave, some interference pattern between the very, very, very high frequency inner vibrations and that are right down to the subatomic realm, and the very cosmic outer vibrations. So as we've discovered each new planet, it's corresponded with breakthroughs and discoveries in our own consciousness. So going back to the French Revolution and American Revolution, we know that was one Pluto cycle ago, and Pluto, which is not just the planet of death, it's the planet of death and rebirth. And we moderners now know that Pluto is the planet of transformation, or transfiguration, or mutation, or metamorphosis. And what seems like death in the moment is really just part of a larger process. I know some of you who have been following me for a while have heard me quote William Blake, who wanted on his gravestone as his epitaph, he wanted William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. This is the real meaning of Pluto. And so Pluto is about death and rebirth, but we come back to time scales again, and that is in the urgency of death. The last thing we can think about is rebirth. We're dying. I mean, whether it's a physical death or a metaphysical death. Every time someone says no to you, whether it was a parent when you were 2 years old and you were doing something that you didn't know was wrong and the parent said, no, don't do that, a part of you dies. In a relationship, if it ends, there's a part of you that plutonically dies. When you go apply for a job or you do an audition for something and you don't get the part, that's a plutonic death. And in the moment, you just think about the death. We're talking about time scales. So Pluto, in that moment of death, is locked in the urgency of trying to survive and then maybe going into some altered state. So the question or the discussion that I had with this friend of mine that turned into a multi-year conversation, we would meet at conferences and we would pick up the same discussion, is here's the way we phrased it. If you were a caterpillar and you were inside a cocoon and you were beginning to disintegrate, is there a way that we can get a message into the cocoon to tell you, hey, it's cool. You're going to be a butterfly any minute or any day or any week? Do you understand the nature of this question? Because when a client comes to you as an astrologer, or when you're going through life and you're going through some incredibly difficult period of time, the question is, are there words that can help you understand what's going on so that you can process it from a different time scale, so you don't have to waste energy on the fear that's associated with death, and instead can focus on the larger time scale so that you can position yourself for the rebirth process, which is really what's contained in any moment of death. Are you with me here? All right. Trust me, there's a reason why we're talking about this. Because we're in a moment of death. And we really have been, on some level, on a very large time scale, slow motion, since the discovery of Uranus and the end of monarchies and the end of, single, royal blood that owned a country that everyone else was just subject to, and that there was a process that was going on 250 years ago that was a Plutonic process as Pluto moved into Aquarius then, which it is now again, right now. And when I say right now, I don't mean today. I mean 2023, 2024 into 2025, because Pluto is such a slow-moving planet that all planets look like they go forward and they look like they go backwards. They don't really. They go forward and then they look like they go backwards, retrograde and direct and retrograde and so on. So that when a slow-moving planet like Pluto changes signs, it's a several-year process. And the last time that Pluto moved from Capricorn, the planet of structure, government, banks, buildings, monetary systems, fundamental structures. That's what Capricorn is all about. It looks like we lost the signal.
Seeing it.
Oh, no, it's back. For whatever reason, it looked like it died. All right, so Pluto in Capricorn, because Pluto is not death, it's death and rebirth, had to do, and Pluto has been in Capricorn, it's in Capricorn right now, but it's already tipped into Aquarius, and then back into Capricorn, and then back into Aquarius, and now it's back into Capricorn just for a month and a half, and Pluto is back into at 29.5 degrees of Capricorn, and it's moving into Aquarius in early December, where it will be for the next 20 years. So in Capricorn, Pluto had to do with the death of fundamental structures. You could think of them on lots of levels. Lots of things fell apart that we thought were stable. I mean, even the Constitution of the United States kind of is in this panic structure. Is it going to die? And what part of it is not working? Or is it working? And this still, of course, remains to be seen on some levels. When Pluto was moving through Capricorn, things were about infrastructure, structure, government, banks. In fact, when Pluto moved into Capricorn, that was right at the time of the housing crash in 2008. I think that was the right year. And as Pluto tipped into Aquarius about 1.5 years ago, that was within a few days, that was a failure of the Silicon Valley Bank that was kind of like another bank crash. These things kind of come onto the map and then fall away out of our consciousness. Aquarius is very different than Capricorn. And the last time that Pluto moved from Capricorn into Aquarius was around the period of the American and French revolutions and the First Continental Congress and the setting up, the creation of our judiciary system, and the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution. And so Pluto has come around one full cycle as it's moving back into Aquarius. What is Aquarius? It's not about fundamental reality. It's not about the structures of government and what you see is what you get. Instead, It's about the structure of the larger consciousness. In other words, astrologers often say Aquarius is the social sign. It's the sign that has to do with global thinking, with humanity. It has to do with the future. It has to do with technology. And so this is really, from a Plutonic standpoint, this is the cusp. And remember, cusp is just Latin for edge. This is the edge upon which we stand when it comes to Pluto, this 248-year Pluto cycle. And so we're at the death of this breakdown and the beginning of the reconstruction, because Pluto isn't about death, it's about death and rebirth. It's about deconstruction and reconstruction. And so as Pluto over this last month has backed, it looks like, retrograded back into Capricorn, we're getting this kind of remedial, enforced remedial training in everything that we didn't get right while Pluto was disintegrating and deconstructing all these stability, these things that we thought were fundamentally stable as it moved through Capricorn over the past 15, 16, 17 years. So that's just one cycle. Within that, we have a 165-year cycle of Neptune, which right now is at the very, very, very last degree of Pisces. It almost went into Aries, and that's a big change because Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, and when a planet moves from Pisces into Aries, it's the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next cycle. And Neptune over this last year has just about touched into Aries, and then it turned retrograde. It's backing up, not very far, not very fast, and then it will move direct again and move into Aries for the first time in 165 years. It'll do that next summer, next late spring, early summer. And then it'll back into Pisces for another little touch, and then into Aries, where it'll stay for about 14 years. On top of that, we have Uranus at the very end of Taurus. Uranus is a bit faster. It's an 84-year cycle. So unlike Pluto that can spend 20 to 35 years in a sign, 15 to 35 years, because Pluto's orbit's so elliptical, its movement is, it goes faster and slower, greater than any other planet. Neptune spends about 14 years in a sign. Uranus spends about 7 years in a sign. And next year, Uranus is moving from stable, structured, what you see is what you get, Taurus, having to do with the sensible things, that which we can sense, from Taurus into Gemini. This is another transition, and although it happens every 7 years, astrologers can't find a time in recent history, I say recent history, I really mean a couple thousand years or so, when the three outermost planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, have all changed signs at about the same time. This is the level of the unusual moment that we are in here, and we're feeling it right now we're feeling it with greater impact right now for a number of reasons, which I'll get to in just a moment. But if you're feeling out of whack, if you're feeling like things are like as unstable and uncertain and maybe even frightening because you don't know what's around the corner, all that means is you're paying attention. If you're not feeling that, you're doing the wrong drugs. And those wrong drugs that you may be doing are bad social media, news that's not really news. Not that I'm convinced that any news that we get is real news, but that's another rabbit hole that we're not playing with tonight. But it's been said that if an ET, oh, and there's another rabbit hole we can go down. If an ET came to Earth for the first time, and the first human they encountered was a woman in the process of childbirth, and they thought that's what humans were all about, that's the time we live in. our culture, our planet, our species is in the throngs of the intensity of childbirth, where we are birthing something new and we don't know what it is yet because it's never been birthed, at least here on this planet, and for the others we can't really speak unless you're doing different drugs than I'm doing, in which case maybe you can. But that's how big this transition is right now that we're undergoing. And it's a transition that we feel in the great intensity of this moment. But civilization has been feeling this intensity for about a couple of hundred years. Maybe the Industrial Revolution, the rise of the use of electricity, Uranus being the planet associated with electricity. And of course, it was as the planet Uranus was activated by being discovered out there. That was the same time that we had Faraday and Benjamin Franklin flying the kite and going, oh my God, lightning is electricity. And Galvani taking a dead frog and applying an electrical current to its limbs and watching them twitch as if it was alive, going, holy smokes, our body has electrical currents in it. And there's electrical currents out there. That was around the discovery of Uranus, which is the planet related to electricity. Uranus is lightning. When lightning strikes, all the lights go on for a second. And Uranus is called the Great Awakener. It's called the Great Awakener because whenever you have that aha experience, that's Uranus. But if you're asleep and the lightning strikes and it wakes you up, it might be frightening. You know, lightning will do whatever it needs to do to bridge the gap, to spark wherever there's tension. And if it needs to burn down an entire state, that's not Uranus's problem. That's the problem of not having it together so that the tension was reduced earlier. And we live in a world where the tensions are heightened. And so as we're moving through this period of time, the lightning is striking. We're in the midst of this storm, even though we may have bubbles of safety, whether it's the illusions of safety, whether it's our family, our home, our job, our lifestyle, whatever it is. And all of these things are important because it's important to maintain our sense of identity as everything out there, as humanity is going through this death rebirth process of childbirth and new whatever it is. Now, and let me say one more thing about this. And that is going back 100 years ago, actually 150 years ago, we had Friedrich Nietzsche, who was largely misinterpreted by Hitler and the Third Reich, that Nietzsche wrote about what he called the overman or the superman, which was used as part of the propaganda of Hitler's Germany. But what Nietzsche was really talking about was that humans, as we are not the end point of evolution. I mean, we look at the, amoeba that became, a complex organ organism that then became, an amphibian, that then became, a reptile, that then became a vertebrate, that then became chimpanzees, that through evolutionary process, here we are. That's it. That's the end of evolution. Evolution is an ongoing process. And humanity is not the end point of evolution. In fact, a case could be made for the biggest change over the past couple of hundred years, really 150 years or so, is the increasing of the metaphysical reality over the physical reality. What do I mean by that? Well, what's metaphysical reality? Physical is anything that we can perceive with our five senses. I mean, that's what we were taught as kids. That's what makes things real. If we can taste it, if we can see it, it, if we can smell it, if we can feel it, or what am I missing? Or if we can hear it. I knew there were 5. It's been a rough week. So it really wasn't until Neptune, the planet of metaphysical reality in some ways. You see, Uranus came through and it crashed through. If you were alive in the late 1700s and you had to cope with the fact that Uranus, a new planet, was just discovered, our little local neighborhood all of a sudden was 3 times larger than we thought it was for the last at least couple thousand years or so. As long as we knew there were planets or things going around up there, the discovery of Uranus shattered the illusion that Saturn was the end of the road. Because Saturn, Saturn in mythology is the Grim Reaper, is the end of the road. It's, it's the division between life and death. It's the division between fiction and nonfiction. If it's fiction, it's not real. Huh. Apparently that's not the case. And Neptune, when Neptune was discovered, it was connected to, it was called the planet of delusion, the planet of psychosis, the planet of insane asylums and hospitals and whose phone is that? Kill it, please. Thank you. Didn't mean to be so Aries abrupt, but I'm easily distracted or attracted. So Neptune, however, really, we now know, again, it was thought to be a horrible planet. If you had Neptune going on somewhere, your life was going to fall apart, your energy was weakened, you had loss of direction, perhaps you were going to be delusional or maybe be misled by others. In a Neptune transition, it was likely that it was negative. Until we began to realize, and this was largely through the 1800s, late 1800s, when not only was Uranus discovered, not only was Neptune discovered, but it also made its once every 400-year alignment with Pluto. Now, they didn't know that then because there was no Pluto to align it with, but we now know retrospectively that during the late 1880s, 1890s, Neptune caught up with Pluto, as it does every several centuries, and this was the rise of theosophy. There was mystic and mediumship going on all over the West. In fact, it was also mesmerism. And maybe most importantly for us moderners, it was also the publishing of Freud's interpretation of dreams that all of a sudden had real impact in the 3-dimensional world. And that was the beginning of the disintegration of what we thought was physical reality, what we thought was real. And that, of course, has continued. And as we began pumping high-frequency electromagnetic vibrations into our own atmosphere in the form of radio, television, internet, frequencies, high frequencies, satellites going around the Earth at rates of, how many times a day do they go around the Earth? All of these things have increased the frequency so that we now live in a world that is no longer a physical world. We live in a world that is between physical and metaphysical. Meta just means alongside. It's like beyond, but not really distance beyond. It comes along with. And the word metaphysical certainly preceded Facebook and Meta, just as a point of contention. In fact, many years ago, when I was still academically studying psychology, I decided that how do I want to say this? The underpinning to all of my explorations, whether they be spiritual, scientific, astrological, psychological. My question was this: how does meta become physical? Because somehow it does. We have lives that have constellations of things, of events, of memories, of people, of pictures, of books, of complicated relationships. All of those somehow manifest, and there was nothing there before. This is the process of metaphysical becoming physical. And this is the magic of Neptune, because imagination isn't just psychotic. Imagination is really how we lay down, to quote Caroline Casey, an astrologer that if you don't know, she's an important and fun listen to. You can find her online. Caroline Casey says that imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. I like to say it this way, that Neptune creates non-physical scaffolding upon which Saturn builds reality. Dreams do become real. The ones that don't become real, we call fantasy. And the ones that take over our lives and still don't become real, we might call psychosis. But Neptune is that spectrum. All right. So, we are at a point in history where, for the first time, we have the ability to create feedback mechanisms that give us an awareness that our ancestors did not have. This particular process really began in the 1850s, 60s with the invention of telegraphy, where all of a sudden the question of what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? Have you ever heard that saying? Okay, so there's a backstory here, because English traders, that's traders, not traitors, English traders would make huge amounts of money based upon the futures that they would invest in the tea crop coming from China. But it would take 3 to 4 months for the clipper ships to get around back to England. And so the first ships that could get back with the announcement of whether it was a good crop, a bad crop, or so on, made people fortunes. When telegraphy became a thing, and wires basically crisscrossed the planet and under the oceans around the planet, when that happened, all of a sudden the first crops could come in, and in Singapore or in Beijing, someone could go dee 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 dee, and the person in London goes, crops in, let's buy. That's what it has to do with the price of tea in China. Instantaneous communication, when it first began, had to be through wires, and there was no voice attached to it. It was just signals that went on or off. Da, 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 Morse code. You know, these are short and long pulses of ons and offs. And then there was the ability, well, first in that process, Alexander Graham Bell figured out how to take voice and basically modulate it and send it through a wire. And that was the origin of telephones. And then it was our boy Nikola Tesla, not Marconi, who actually invented wireless transmission of voice, which, again, no big deal, but all of a sudden you could communicate from someone in New York to a ship out in the middle of the Atlantic using voice. And so we forget how significant these technological breakthroughs are, because they changed they changed how we think of what here is. Anyone here ever used Zoom? I mean, if you said Zoom to someone 15 years ago, they would have just said airplane, racing car, ooh, Zoom, you know. But okay, so you're on a Zoom meeting, And if there's a moderator, what does the moderator say to begin the meeting? Is everyone here? Where the fuck is here? No, I mean, I'm not saying this to be funny, although it is kind of funny. It's really important to understand that here used to mean right here. In fact, if you were born into a village, you basically did what your father did if you were a male, and if you weren't, you were basically taught enough so that when they sold you, you got married off, and the parents paid the person to take you, which is what we call dowry. But either way, you didn't have a choice of where you were going on the planet. If you grew up in a little town or a little village somewhere in Greece, chances are that's where you died. Maybe if you were a male, with a 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 year journey that we would call a Jupiterian journey, because Jupiter is the planet of far off distant places, Sagittarius, the Jupiter sign, and that was basically you got hooked or kidnapped by the government, and you all of a sudden were in the Navy or the Army or whatever. Then you went off and had a few years of adventure. If you didn't live, you never came back. But if you lived, you came back to the same town and plugged right back into where you were. So the astrology of those days, the life of those days, was very different than the lives that we lead today. If I went around this room and asked everyone in this room, so where are you from? First of all, we would get very few people would say they were born at SoulFood Books, or even in Redmond, or maybe even within 100 or 200 mile radius of here. And if we go back a generation or 2 or 3, and it used to be you could go back generations, and that's where you were. I mean, it's like it gives new meaning to anyone who's a wine geek and terroir. You know, the connection, the feeling of a wine with where it's from, the earth. And we've lost that as a culture, but we've gained something else. And that is we've gained this fluidity of movement that has created a re-energizing of the species because of the mixing of genetic material that's created a very, very significant explosion that we're still in the midst of. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that we humans like certainty. We like to know that the sun is going to rise in the morning. Oh, I hate to do this. You know, the sun doesn't rise in the morning. Bucky Fuller used to say that until we get our language right, we would never understand where we live. That the sun doesn't rise, the sun doesn't set. That's left over from the belief that the earth was the center of the universe and that the sun rose and set. And Bucky Fuller suggested that we change those words to sunsight and sunclipse, because in the morning the sun comes into sight, and at evening or at night the sun basically is eclipsed by the surface of the earth. The point is, though, that there are entire ancient mythologies that help us, or helped our ancestors, understand that the sun will return, because it does. That's the story. That's the cycle. And we crave for this sense of certainty, this Aristotelian concept of causation, of cause and effect, which may or may not be ultimately what drives the universe. And it's one of the things that made scientists at the turn of the 20th century go crazy when they began to discover that in the subatomic realms that the things that they were seeing were not obeying the laws of cause and effect. You know, there was this plus that doesn't always equal that. It may, but it may just be somewhere near there, or maybe not at all. And this is the reality of the world in which we've inherited. My point here is that the astrology of October and November let's even go September, October, and November, is a microcosmic fractal explosion of these larger changes that began back at the Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter node conjunctions of 2020. And we all know about 2020, and astrologers all over the planet had been talking about, you know, what's going to happen in 2020. I wrote my first published article on 2020 was written a few weeks after the Saturn-Pluto opposition in the fall of 2001. And what I wrote then was, if we don't get it right now, if we don't get it correctly, yeah, you know what I mean. If we don't get it, it's not if we don't get it right now, it's if we don't get it right now, meaning in the fall of 2001, that we're going to be facing the same issues from a very different perspective in 2020. And of course, I mean, you know, certainly COVID or the governmental control of, you know, quarantine and all of that fallout was a part of this, but it was also a lot of other issues were going on feeding into that, and a lot of those issues became more and more problematic as we moved through the 2010 through 2020 period of time, which in some ways was akin to the 1960s. And I know for those of you who have listened to me talk that some of this stuff is repeat, but it's important to keep going back and understanding how this all fits together, because in the mid-1960s, the planet Uranus, the planet of awakening, shock, surprise, awe, revolt, rebellion, revolution, change, technology, future, conjoined, lined up with Pluto, the planet of death and rebirth. And of course, during this period of time, we had the psychology of, well, the leading psychologist in academia in 1960-61, if you asked any professional, who's the leading psychologist in the United States right now, they would have said, oh, that would be Dr. Timothy Leary, the professor at Harvard. That was before he discovered any sort of psychedelics. But what happened during that period of time in the 1960s was the plutonic, and that's the death rebirth of this idea of what consciousness is, because obviously the great breakthrough that's still, we're still feeling ramifications from this even now, is that the use of psychedelics, entheogens, plant medicine, altered states of consciousness, yoga, meditation, hypnosis, all those things are basically a form of death and rebirth, but it's not physical death. It's ego death. It's the, back to the William Blake, born 1757, died many times since. By the way, Ram Dass, who was Dr. Richard Alpert, also a Harvard psychology professor, along with Timothy Leary, has quipped a number of times that the great American death mantra is, oh shit. Because we fear the unknown and the uncertainty because it's not part of our spiritual metaphysical system as it is in some other cultures. So what happens is that if we fear death, if we think that we don't know what happens at death, if we believe that death is the end, if we believe at the moment of death we're going to get judged and we're going to go to eternal heaven or hell, we have fear around what's going to happen. And so that fear of the uncertainty we're seeing culturally as the entire planet is being pushed into some unknown future. as the change of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and Saturn even for that matter, Saturn, which changes signs every 2.5 years or so, is also catching up and lining up with Neptune, just as Neptune changes signs in its once every 14-year time, as Pluto is changing signs, as Uranus is changing signs. And people are scared. They don't have to know astrology, they just know something's going on, and I don't like it because it's different than what I thought things were. And so Freud had this concept that obviously psychology has moved way beyond the work of Freud, even though if it wasn't for his pioneering work, we wouldn't have much of the vocabulary that we have around things like unconscious projection, transference, resistance, all these things that we can see whether we're a counseling psychologist or just in our relationships. But bear with me here a second because I forgot where I was going with this. I can do this. All right, someone help me. Who's paying attention? What was I saying? I totally blitzed.
The 60s to the 2012.
So the thing about realizing that there is an ego, another Freudian word. I mean, it existed, but no one ever applied it in the way that we apply it as, oh, well, that person's just acting from their ego, or they have a big ego, or I mean, these things are all from the Freudian from the Freudian concept. But as we move through that and beyond that, what we're left with is this idea, this notion that metaphysical reality creates physical reality, and that we can die and be reborn, and that in fact we can't die without being reborn, whether it's physical or metaphysical, because it's all part of a larger process that we blip in and blip out of, whether we're talking about our physical body, or whether we're talking about a semester at school, or whether we're talking about a relationship or a job or whatever. They're all temporary. So one of Freud's concepts, I remember where I was going with this, thank you. One of Freud's concepts was something called infantile regression. Has anyone heard of infantile regression? It basically says that when the psyche is under pressure, it immediately goes back in its mind to some time in the past where it remembers feeling safer. Meaning like at mom's breast, or having parents that took care of stuff. I mean, if you were lucky enough to have parents that did that, and I know that many of us did not on various levels. But the point is that under duress, we go back. We go back to a place where we think it was better, whether or not it was. And that's the important concept. Because what we do is we make up a past that's better that we can go back to. We don't do this consciously necessarily, but regardless of what your politics individually may be, I'm convinced that this is the driving motivational factor of Make America Great Again. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Again, and I'm not, I mean, there's lots of political debates on lots of different subjects, and although I might guess that we might fall on the same side of many of them, we may not on all of them. This is not about that. This is about under pressure, we want to go back into a place that was safe. That's what's going on right now. And right now, as Pluto has backed up into Capricorn for just a few weeks, including Election Day in the United States. And then it'll move into Aquarius, where it will be for the next couple of decades that will thrust us into the future. And some of us will go into the future excited about the potential, knowing that we don't know what's going on and there's a lot of work to be done and that this can still be frightening, but this is where we're going. And then there are others who are basically saying, whether they're saying it consciously or not, they're basically screaming inside their brains, hell no, I won't go. And I have a belief that, now, before I tell you what this belief is, I want to say one other thing, and that is a word about hell. Because remember, Pluto is the lord of the hell realms. Well, modern post-Jungian psychologists all understand, as kind of led by James Hillman. Anyone know the work of James Hillman? Brilliant, The Soul's Code, magnificent book. 100 years of psychoanalysis and no one's getting better. That's not quite the right words, but that's one of his books.
Where would you start?
Excuse me?
Where would you start?
The Soul's Code is really manageable, but any Hillman, Google him on the net. He was the guy behind the Pacifica University in Santa Barbara, their PhD psychology program. He was actually worked as a secretary of the Urania meetings. Those were the Jung-led meetings in not Vienna, in Geneva, I think, through the 1950s and into the early 60s. Anyhow, sorry?
Uncertainty.
Thanks. Hillman's idea, or one of his many notions of this whole post-Freudian view of the world, is that that the metaphysical becomes physical. Anyone know the work of Rupert Sheldrake, The New Science of Life, or The Presence of the Past? He coined the word morphogenesis, morphic fields. These are all kind of new biology and new psychology of understanding that there's something that exists as a non-physical field that we grow into. Rupert Sheldrake says the acorn becomes an oak tree not because of the programming in the DNA, but because that's what acorns have done forever. And there's a field of energy that just literally brings that into being. And we all live in these morphic or morphogenetic fields. So, did someone just offer me a cappuccino? I can't go to sleep. If you want to hear something really crazy, and then I'm going to bring this full circle here in just a moment. This thing will end in about an hour or so, and then you'll all go home and go to sleep. I'm giving the opening talk on a 2-day conference in London at 2 o'clock this morning. Because that's 10 a.m. when the conference starts in London, and I'll be giving a talk on this on Zoom, on something, a virtual talk. So where is here? I'm going to be introduced and say, we're glad to have Rick Levine here, all the way from wherever. Where is here? So this idea that we are living in a time of rapid disintegration of the three-dimensional world that is being driven not only by our increasing awareness of planets that we're learning about them faster than we can even incorporate them. I mean, I get that astronomers have dismissed Pluto as a planet, but look, we as astrologers use the word planet in the sense of the Greek word planet or planeta, which actually means wanderer. And there are about 500,000 things going around the sun that NASA tracks. And there's about maybe 30,000 of them that actually have names that you can map in a birth chart. It's all connected. Everything is connected to everything. And right now we're discovering planets everywhere in the galaxy. I mean, we used to think that our little solar system was a unique thing in a unique galaxy. And now we know that of the hundreds of trillions of stars in our medium-sized little galaxy, actually the galaxy is one of hundreds of millions of galaxies that we've already identified. And in fact, it appears that most stars have planets going around them. And not only that, Pluto is not the outermost planet, or planetoid, or if you want to call it that. I don't care, that's a label. But out beyond Pluto, there's Eris and Sedna and Makemake and Varuna and all these other planets that are being brought into our consciousness, because as it grows out there, it grows in here. And I want to come back to the James Hillman point that I didn't quite make. And that is, James Hillman, one of my favorite of his books, not an easy read, but it's a very potent book. It's called The Dream and the Underworld. And it's basically a book about Pluto. And although James Hillman was a competent astrologer, he did not wave that banner around out there as an academic. But the fact of the matter is that the hell realms are the same as anything that's not on the three-dimensional plane. So that your unconscious mind is in fact Pluto. Remember, as above, so below. And as we discovered Pluto in the 1930s, and as we've developed, we now know how much of our life is governed by things that we don't even know that exist within us, and that there's this ongoing process of trying to make the invisible visible, trying to make the hell realms, bring them up into the awareness, shine the light into the darkness so we can see what we're afraid of, so we can engage it, so that we can then deal with it. Because things that are hidden have power over us. You know, a plutocracy, by definition, is a government not by people who are rich, but by people who are so rich the rich don't even know them. Pluto, underground, hidden. Pluto, the reason why it's associated with immense wealth is you can have a lot of money in the bank, but if you own a diamond mine, or a gold mine, or a copper mine, or a silver mine, or a tin mine, or oil under the ground, now you're talking about wealth. And a plutocracy is not a government by those people who have a lot of money. It's by those people who have such immense amounts of hidden wealth, they own everything. And as George Carlin says, they're in a club and you're not a member. I miss George Carlin. So, here we are in basically the end of a very important phase, and we're at a point of delicate transition. But in the moment of death, there are unknowns. We don't know what happens, no matter how much spiritual deep diving you've done, no matter how many near-death experiences you've either had or read about. When it happens to you or to me, we don't know. We've not been there before that we can remember, at least most of us. Again, I think it depends on what drugs you're doing. These are frightening times. But if we fall into hate, fear, negativity, we get pushed back into that illusion of something in the past was better. It's Thomas Wolfe's famous novel. Was it Thomas Wolfe? You Can't Go Home Again? Was that Thomas Wolfe? I think so. There's something about this moment in time that is pushing us forward faster than ever. And a lot of it has to do with the astrology that I've described, that I've been talking about on this stage for months, maybe even years, that astrologers all over the world are talking about. But it also has to do with something else that's tied into the astrology, and that is the technology that we are living in, because the outside and the inside are not like one another. They're the same damn thing. And what's happening out there with the recording ability of cell phones and of instantaneous communication and social media, and all of this kind of stuff has made us already into something that has never existed before. And so the rules that we come into this moment with are not working. That whole idea of the breakdown of cause and effect. And for an astrologer to say that, there's a bit of heresy in that. I gave a lecture in England 3 weeks ago now, I guess it was. And the title of the lecture was something like respecting the astrology, what was it? Understanding the astrology of the 21st century while still respecting the past. We don't live in the same world that the astrologers lived in 100 or 1,000 years ago. It's different. We don't spend our entire day, many of us, don't spend our entire waking hours trying to figure out how we're going to get enough drinking water, or food or shelter. Not that we don't struggle with some of those issues, but not in the same sense as we once did. My guess is that although this was a very common prediction based upon ancient or traditional Hellenistic Greek astrological tools, I'm guessing here that none of us will die a death by wild dogs. Things have changed. We used to live in a world where there was a jungle out there, whether it was a jungle or a desert, and we basically had to gather food in order to survive. We now live in an information jungle, and we gather information in order to survive. And on this month's YouTube, which I just posted, on the 1st, just a few days ago, someone posted, all this political stuff, I just, as many of you know, I close most of what I do with Think Cosmically, Act Locally. And this person said, I'm just acting locally, I'm not getting involved in anything politically, because it doesn't impact me. I don't even know what to say. And again, I'm not saying that every person should drop their individual life and go out and be a social activist. But when I talk about acting locally, I'm talking about doing it with awareness, because ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is ignorance. Ignorance is being, what's that the saying, go with the flow? You've heard that saying? Well, I've heard people say that only dead fish go with the flow. That there's a difference between going with the flow and swimming in the flow. Because if you're swimming in the flow, you're still moving your tail, bad image, you're still negotiating and navigating how you move through the downstream. And we're not able to fight that 2 billion year life tide that we're all in the midst of. We're unable to fight that. However, we're all able to make choices based upon what our view of the world is. And those choices that we make individually actually impact those around us. And those around us then begin to act in groups that basically spread. I mean, kindness is like the opposite of a disease. It's contagious. And so as we act locally, if we go to this place of fear, if we go to this place of disassociation and saying they're all stupid because they don't see what's going on, or they're wrong and I'm right, even though we know that they're wrong and we're right, it's a very dangerous position to be in, because this is the solution to where we are at right now comes from basically keeping dialogue open. And there's some of this that is beginning to occur. Whether it will manifest as is being described, or whether it will even have a chance to manifest politically, I have no idea. I don't know. As many of you know from other stuff that I've done online, I'm not predicting this election. I don't have a damn clue. But I do know that whatever happens in the election in the United States will impact the entire world. And I know that what each and every individual in the United States of America does today, tomorrow, next week, and the next weeks will impact the election. And so I can predict the election in this way. that if you're not involved and you don't care and you don't have any information about what's going on, or are only getting all your information from one and only one source, then you're not going to be happy. And you lose the right to complain. Because if you don't try to make changes, you don't have the right to complain. At least if you try to make changes. And I think that this is part of the confusion of where we are at, because even with the information that we have, things are not as clear as they once were. Remember, we have Neptune, the planet of illusion, delusion, spirituality, fuzziness. Neptune's job is to melt the hard edges of reality into our imagination. And we have Neptune at the end of the very last sign, Pisces, which is it's the cosmic swamp where everything goes to basically melt into whatever it is that grows out of it. And so we're at this point in history that is very potent and very powerful. And rather than standing up here tonight and talking about the eclipse and the upcoming full moon, which is very important, I do that all on the, it's online. You can find it, go to youtube.com and just Google Rick Levine if you haven't found it. I mean, I drill down far enough on that I look at these evenings as a chance to kind of bring our awareness to a place where we can really see what's going on in the bigger picture. This is as dynamic and as crazy and as certain and as frightening as it seems. However, to close down and to go home and pull the covers up over your head and not answer the phone and not look at the news and not vote, you'll end up basically just like having a chart. I have had clients come to me, I've been told I have such an awful chart. That's such bullshit, because there is no such thing as a bad chart. What there's such a thing as is being that dead fish floating downstream without doing yoga. And when I say doing yoga, I don't mean sitting in postures, although there's nothing wrong with doing asanas. What I mean is harnessing the power. The word yoga comes from yoga, it's the yoke, the yug, the yoke of the oxen that takes the power that would normally disperse and it channels it so that you can actually plow a field. And that in each and every one of our lives, whether we do an official form of a practice, whether it's physical yoga, posture, asana yoga, hatha yoga, or whether it's jhana yoga, mental, or karmic yoga, a yoga of doing right action. There's many types of practices, and that is basically the antidote or the remedy to what someone might call a bad chart. Is basically learning how to harness the power of the oxen, because the worse the aspect is, the more powerful it becomes when one learns how to work with it. Traditionally, if you had a square between Saturn and Mars, for example, those were the two worst planets. They were called the malefics. And if they were square, they were considered to be afflicted. This is an astrology word. Well, I would suggest that you can look at some of the most successful people in the world and see that they've taken the energy of that fiery, feisty, directed, hot-headed Mars that's at right angles and resistant to Saturn's rules, laws, authority, and they've done stuff with that have turned into a Nobel Peace Prize or into great spiritual, teachings or whatever. So this is not a bad time. This is a time of great opportunity. There's, I think it's hexagram 28, if I'm not mistaken, from the I Ching, that basically says the ridgepole sags to the breaking point. And a ridgepole, when the ancients in China, when they built bridges, they would have a ridgepole, which was the main structure that the bridge was then built around. And this hexagram says the ridgepole sags to the breaking point. It behooves the great man to have somewhere to go. We all need to be a great man or person at this time. We all need to have somewhere to go. The ridgepole is sagging and things are breaking. And how thoroughly they break will depend upon how much we get right now how much, is that right now again, how much we get right now, not how much we get right now. There's not even a comma there. That's an interesting one. But it depends on how much we get right at this time, because if we don't get it right, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. But it will, in fact, get better or get different. And just for those of you who are hanging on, oh my God, this is such an awful period of time, and some of you are probably not. Some people are having a great time now. But they're not reading the news. But here's my prophecy. I'm not using the word prediction, because when you make a prediction, it disempowers you, because that's the way it's going to be. I don't know how it's going to be. But my vision is that as Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Jupiter through 2025 and 2026 all make interlacing sextiles, the aspect of cooperation, and trines, the aspect of flowing energy, as they will do in 2025, 26, 27, that we have an opportunity to come into a time where culturally, where globally, we will look back at the late teens, or even the Uranus-Pluto squares of 2010 to 2015 to 2012 to 2015, the highlight of that point. But from let's say the last 20 years, and we will look back at that and go, wow, do you remember how awful it was then? Just like people living in the 1950s, we say maybe they were asleep, but those people living in the 50s who were parents or grandparents of ours look back at the 1930s and 40s and go, those were horrific and horrible times. There was a depression, and there was a war that we had no idea what was going to happen the following day. And in some ways, this period of the last 20 years has been a little bit like that. But when you're in the midst of it, you don't see things as they are. You see them as they feel, like the immediacy or the urgency of the moment. So that's my rant for the night. I hope it was not what you were expecting. I'm kind of glad that the projector wasn't working, because often I go there and I end up talking about, jargon and technical stuff that you can get online and from other places. And I think sometimes it's really important to take a breath, step back, and understand that the only thing that we can change is our awareness. Buddhism 101. When you change your awareness, everything can change, because we make decisions in our lives. This comes from a book called The Astrology of Personality by George Kelly. It's a book that's used in psychology courses. And George Kelly says that the purpose of therapy is to have the therapist help alter the person's worldview. Because based upon our worldview, that limits the choices. We can't turn right at the intersection if we think there's no road going right. And I don't mean right here as right, wrong. Our decisions are based upon what our view of the world is. And at this point in time, our world is changing. And I don't care where you are politically. I don't care how you label yourself politically, sexually, this issue, that issue. Basically, all of our jobs are to soften the outer edges of our reality so that we can include more in it, because as we have greater awareness, we have greater choices, and we don't just become dead fish being swept down with the tide. Thank you. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take about a 10-minute break, 15-minute break. This is your last chance to get coffee and to put the baristas to work. And thank you, everyone, and thank you, SoulFood, for being here. And two things about that. Number one, on break, You know, I say this, but it's really important. We don't only get to vote at a ballot box, we get to vote with how we spend our money, whether it's in the grocery store, whether we buy organic food or shit food or whatever. This is a form of voting. And everyone has birthdays coming up, anniversaries, whatever. And instead of buying whatever you might buy at the big box store down the block or online through Amazon, take a walk around here and see what you can do, because that's a way of voting that keeps this going. And as you know, the money, the $5 a person that you contribute, it's not for me. It's not for profit. It's basically to keep this going on a place like, a place like this that has a connection with the local community, that gives us a place to come to on nights like this. So support Soul Food, support your local vendors, the individual makers, and enough said on that. Now, last thing is, we're going to still do a couple of charts. We'll do 3 charts. I will have slips of paper on this table. If you've never had your chart done here and you'd like to have it go into the hat, a real hat, I'll pick 3 and we'll do 3 short readings after the break. And thank you all for showing up and being here. And the slips will be here, and we'll reconvene for those of you who are not faint of heart in about 10 minutes. Thank you. And for those of you online, we are going to be taking a break. Oh, yeah. Those of you online, hang on a second. Yeah, hold on. Oh, there they are, right here.
Yeah, a couple times. I don't put my name in.
And if you fill out one of these things, make sure you put your full name. I will not use your full name online. I'll just use your first name. Make sure you put your email address, so if I need to get a hold of you for any reason afterwards, I will not sell or do anything with your email address other than sending you an email and giving you an option to never hear from me again. And there was one other thing about this. I don't know. That's it. Oh, and when you fold it, just fold it in half once. That was the thing. Just fold it in half once. All right.
I'll donate the pen.
Hold on.
Is there still room in this Goa that you're doing?
There is. There is.
Gonna do it last year, and then.
Tell me your name again. I think Jennifer.
Yeah.
There is still room, and we're going to be I think part of the uncertainty of everything. Last year we had 35 people, and that was the absolute limit. I did not want to do it that big. This year I was going to cut it off at about 25, but we have about 20 people, and so there is room.
Okay.
And if you would like, if you want to, now isn't a good time, but if you wanted to chat a little bit tomorrow or over the next few days, I'd be glad to answer questions and give you a little bit of other information if you'd like.
I would love that.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be back there again, not just for me, but the people who attended last year, they have an ongoing group. that they've been in. I mean, they meet once or twice a month as a group, and it's just like it's like so heartening to see, and it really is. It's a life-changing event, not just for the participants, but for me every time. And the place where we do it is absolutely magical. It's an Ayurvedic healing spa. Yeah, and it's like I get body work. When you guys go home, I stay for 2 weeks at the exact same place, just because I can. Where do you live? Do you live around here? Or? In Seattle. Jennifer.
You got it. Yeah. Can I like write down my information, or do you want
You can do two things. You can do. First of all, take one of those, and that has my email on it. It doesn't have my phone number. Could you give me one of those pens for a sec? And actually,
Did you want a coffee?
huh?
Would you like a coffee?
No.
No? Okay, I wondered if you were joking or not.
Well, part of me would because I really do have to.
I get that. But yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Right?
projector, but I'm going to run the charts and I'm going to tell you and describe the best that I can. We won't spend a huge amount of time here, but we'll make do and we'll make it work. So, the only rules are, hold on, let me take the...
You're good.
Oh, okay, thank you for that. And welcome back to anyone online who's still here. It looks like there's still about 450 people here, so nice little group. And I'm now going to share my screen somehow here. Present and share screen and select window and we'll see what happens here. All right, is anything showing on the screen, Sam? It's going to take a minute for it to actually appear, I think.
Yes.
Are we good?
Yep.
All right, welcome back everyone, and welcome back to those of you who are here still at SoulFood. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. It's about 33 of us. That's the Jesus year. So the rule here basically, and those of you online will be able to see the charts, but those of you who are here are going to be working in the dark. Next month I will have the projector working again, but we are technologically handicapped tonight. So the rule is that if I choose your name, you need to identify yourself. I do not need a passport or a driver's license. I just need like a, it's me. And the only thing is for you to be aware that although it may be cool to have your chart done, we're not doing it for you, you're being used. Now, hopefully you get something out of it, and that's great and wonderful, but I only ask that you be honest if there's something you don't, if I ask a question you don't want to say in front of a whole group of who the hell are all these people, that's totally cool, but if you interact, it helps us, it becomes better for everyone, even if not for you. Well, it might be for you. So the first of the 3 charts that we have, I had 3, but now I only have 2. Uh-oh. Well, the first of the 2 charts, we'll pick another one, is Thea. Thea. Hi. Hi. All right, and I'm going to enter the data. Born May 9th, 1981. A local, 11:29 a.m., and that's actually in Redmond, Washington. I didn't know anyone was born in Redmond, Washington. That takes away my whole theory about, were you born here? Well, there's that saying, the comedian Stephen Wright, someone once said, have you lived here all your life? And he said, so far. All right, I'm going to move this around so I can see you guys while I'm talking. All right, Thea, have you ever had your chart done before? Do you?
I have, yes.
And you know astrology a little bit?
Yeah, I'm just starting.
So what's your favorite thing about your chart?
Mine.
Spoken like a Taurus.
Yes.
So as you may know, Taurus is the sign that has to do with material possession. And in fact, Taurus is related to the senses, to that which is real, but it's really about our values and how we value those things that we own, or how we want to own things that we value. And I think of Taurus as, in some ways, it's a lot more than just this, but it's the I, me, mine sign. And so it's interesting that we ask most people, I've been asking people this question, what's your favorite thing about your chart forever? And I have to give you kudos, because you're the first person that didn't answer with oh, it's my Venus square, blah, 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 or whatever. So, well done. So when I look at your chart, I notice a couple of things right away. Number one is that when you were born, the sun was in Taurus, and it was very closely aligned with Chiron. Are you aware of that?
Now I am.
Now I am. Okay. So Chiron mythologically was the wounded healer and the original teacher, mentor. Chiron taught healing arts to Asclepius and martial arts to Hercules. So Chiron was like the original mentor, but the teachings from Chiron.
Are we supposed to be able to see the chart?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No, there is no. Just clarification. If you're online, you can see the chart, but it's not being projected because we do not have a connection for the projector here today. So, Chiron, as the original mentor, the teachings of Chiron actually originated from a wound. And Chiron had a wound that the gods took mercy on Chiron because he was such an amazing healer and teacher, and so they granted him immortality, but didn't fix his critical wound. And so Chiron really represents in every human that part of us that no amount of therapy, medicine, sex, drugs, rock and roll will make go away, but we live with it, but it also feeds the work that we do in order to teach or help or heal others. So that's the first thing I notice in your chart. The second thing that I notice is that although you are a Sun-Chiron conjunction in Taurus, with Venus and Mars all in Taurus, that's a lot of fixed energy. In fact, you have not only those 4 planets in Taurus, fixed energy, but you also have Leo rising with the moon just having risen over the ascendant in Leo, lined up with the north node or the nodal axis of the moon. And the nodal axis of the moon, actually this is part of the talk that I'm giving tonight or tomorrow morning at 2 a.m. It's about how nodes are actually the points at which rhythm, at which music, at which hum becomes real. It's where reality ties itself up in a knot. And the wave of the moon going around the earth intersects with the wave of the earth going around the sun, and we call that intersection point or points the nodes of the moon. And your moon being right there strengthens the moon. It gives it kind of like a karmic level of importance about the purpose of who you are in this lifetime and the work that you're doing, that your soul is here to do. And it's interesting because your sun is fixed Taurus, along with Venus and Mars and Chiron, fixed Taurus. Your moon and your node and your ascendant is Leo, fixed fire. So there's more, energy that is going from the inside out rather than the outside in. And then on top of that, there is Uranus. We talked about Uranus earlier this evening as the eccentric, surprising, awakening, rebellious planet. And Uranus in your chart is in fixed water sign, Scorpio, opposite all of your Taurus stuff, and most exactly opposite Venus. So this leads me to believe that you're weirder than people think you are. Well, and I say that in a way because Uranus basically, in some ways, it may even be the opposite, that you really try to contain your energy and be, I'm going to use the word normal, but kind of there are things that you would like to do that may feel like they're out of bounds or a little bit too far. So instead what you do is you connect up with people who are crazier than you. You know, there's this kind of, you know, attraction to people who have broken the rules that maybe sometimes you feel that you would like to break, but you can't go there, so you let other people do your dirty work. Does that make sense a little bit? No, so let the record show that Thea is nodding her head vertically to the axis of the center of the planet and saying, yes, it does. I would imagine, though, that once you make up your mind, you can present the case that you're interactive and that you're listening and you're talking, but it's not having any impact on what you already have made your mind up to be. And the reason why I'm saying that is with all those planets in fixed sign Taurus, practical Earth, the Moon North Node and Ascendant in fixed sign Leo, which is action, practical action. It's about, you know, how do you present yourself to others in a way that is self-expressive so that either people can see who you are or see how you feel, or that you can then heal them with your love and help. You know, there's something here about the love of Venus, the love of of Leo, that's very important as part of your soul's work, that I would imagine in some ways is connected to that whole Chiron piece. And yet, sometimes it's a bit at odds with it, but your escape is the fact that when you were born, Mercury was in Gemini. And there's the part of you that can appear more engaged than you might really be. You can appear interactive. And I'm not saying this is fake or anything, but there's this kind of ability to be clever, to be witty, to be interactive, to kind of have real communication, but somewhere on the inside, it's not changing what's going on the inner realms on some level. Would you say that that's fair? And Thea said yes, for those of you online who can't hear her. Now, the other thing that stands out as really strong in your chart is that when you were born, the planets Jupiter and Saturn were lined up. Now, it takes Jupiter about 12 years to go around once. It takes Saturn almost 30 years to go around once. And what that means is that when Jupiter's gone around once in 12 years, Saturn has moved kind of, you know, like a third of the way around. So it takes Jupiter 20 years to catch up to Saturn every time. And this is really the astrological origin of our calendrical decade. Jupiter aligned with Saturn within a year of 1880, 1900, 1920, 40, 60, 80, 2000, 2020 they aligned. They will again in 2040. Now, in early 1981, they were still within alignment from the alignment of 1980. And so you were born with expansive Jupiter lined up with contractive Saturn. In some ways, Jupiter and Saturn are the social regulators. They go out beyond the personal stuff. You are bull. You are bullheaded. You are stable. You are, you know, you stand in your place like a bovine does. And I had a partner once who said, you can't call a woman a cow. I go, well, look, in the United States, I get that because all you do is you think of McDonald's or something. However, there are entire civilizations that the cow is the singular most sacred being because it's what in Sanskrit is sattvic, because it gives of itself without diminishing itself. And so the holy cow is really something that is real. And so, but cows or bovines are stable in their position, whatever it is. And so you are a cow, maybe not a silly cow, and maybe not a, you know, raw burger or something, but there's that bovine energy that it can be very sweet can be very sensually oriented, can be very simplistically oriented, and with your Mars, it's like you move in those directions. Maybe you don't move fast, but when you go somewhere, you're going to get there. With Venus in Taurus, it's like maybe you don't, just love anything, but when you do, it's real. There's that whole sense of all of that Taurus stuff. And then you feel, our moon is how we feel, you feel like a lion. There's a part of you that looks in the mirror and sees the roar, even though that's not necessarily what other people necessarily see, although you do have Leo rising, so even that may be part of it. However, your Jupiter and Saturn are aligned in Libra, and both Libra and Taurus are Venus related. So we know that the Venus piece in your chart is important, and Venus is in Taurus, which is one of its home signs, Libra being the other. But I would say that one of the dilemmas in your chart, in your life, is the when to grow, when to pull in. Jupiter expand, Saturn contract. Oh, that looks good, I'll do it, but I'll go slowly. Oh shit, I should have done it faster. All right, next time I'll do it faster. Wow, sucks. I shouldn't have done it so fast. Now, you understand it's that constant dance between not so much the yes and the no, but between make it more and make it less. But it's that process which pushes you along in life, even though at times it might feel a bit, problematic or disruptive. You want to share anything with us about how any of this either makes sense or doesn't make sense?
Right on.
All we got from Thea is it's right on. All right, well, we'll take that. I would say, though, one thing is that I talked about Uranus early on, and Uranus is that 84-year cycle, 7 years in each of 12 signs, 7 times 12 is 84. For the last 6 years, Uranus has been moving through Taurus, which would lead me to believe that over the last maybe even 4 or 5 years, that your life has probably been a bit crazier than it has been at other times in your life, because as Uranus lined up with your Mars and then your Chiron and then your Sun, and right now your Venus, and it's opposite your Uranus, you're at your Uranus opposition, meaning that roughly, at age 42, 3, right in there, in that period of time, Uranus is halfway around, and that saying life begins at 40 really is life begins at 42, 43 at the Uranus opposition. Why? Because we're ready to break loose from all the shit that we've been doing because we knew we had to, because we were a grown-up, we were an adult, we had to be responsible. And now that Uranus comes through your chart over the last few years, and even now in relationship and or with money, and things are exploding, and and you're ready to say, my life is ready to begin, because I'm not old yet, but I'm not young anymore. And if I don't do it now, I may never get a chance to do it, so here I go. How does that fit?
Yeah, it's been a crazy last few years for sure.
All we're getting out of fixed sign Thea is yes. No, it's good. Certainly other things, but those are the things that stand out as I look at your chart. Okay? Make sense? All right. Number 2. Valentina?
Hi.
Valentina, hey. All right, let's see what we got here. We got a Valentina, V-A-L-E-N-T. Those are lots of E's and A's. It's like somehow or other you bought 2 E's instead of an I. Valentina. All right. 10-14-98. 10-14-98. Whoop, it didn't like that. Let's try that again. 10-14-98. At 9 a.m., that sounds rounded off. Is it?
My mom said that's when she scheduled the procedure.
Okay, I don't believe it. In other words, if that's when she scheduled the procedure, there was anesthetics and this and that, and so it would be, if you were born in Kirkland, and so there is a birth certificate that has a time on it, and it's something that you can acquire. Huh?
It's not 9.
Well, I would guess that if the procedure was scheduled for 9, then you were probably born at 9:20 or 9:35 or 9:50. I don't know. And I'm going to take that into consideration as I look at your chart, just because I've done enough of these that I don't trust any birth times, especially when they're 9 o'clock. All right, so. Oh, why isn't this showing the way I want it to show? Okay, there we go. All right. So here we have Valentina's chart. Valentina, oh, look at that. Another Leo moon. This seems to happen. So you guys got something to talk about. You both have Leo moons. Your charts are very different. Although both of you have Libra energy also. That you are a Libra sun sign, which is Venus related, and Thea is a Taurus sun sign that is Venus related. But you both have Leo moons, which in some ways suggests to me that you feel more wired, animated, intentful than perhaps sometimes you are. I mean, the Libra sun lined up with Libra's main planet Venus is, again, there's a sweetness here. There's maybe even an artistic lean in life that is important. I see a smile that to me I call the smile of recognition. But that certainly is important, and yet there's also like Thea, you have a lot of fixed energy. You have that Leo moon, which is right up toward the top of your chart. You were not born at noon, but if the moon was what was important, and it is, you were born with the moon at the noon point. You know, you wouldn't have seen it because the sun was already up. You were born at 9 in the morning, so it was already light out, but the moon was right up there. And so in some way, that putting on the presentation, putting on the show, kind of wanting to express yourself, and self-expression is a good leonine word, but with intention, that this becomes part of who you are in the outer world. Yet, in your personal world, that's your ascendant, which is more about how people see you, and that even if you were born at 9:15 or 9:30, that would be Scorpio rising. And so what's interesting to me is that there's a part of you I see as an artist or a performer of some sort. Maybe that's not what you do, but there's at least some piece of that. And yet, you gain your power by not saying everything. There's a part of you that holds that energy in. Mercury in Scorpio on the ascendant, rising. Mercury is how we speak, it's how we listen. Scorpio is related to the fire of intensity, of passion, of hidden, because you can't just have passion on the surface always, otherwise people would leave in the middle of every conversation. And so you learn early on in life that you don't express all of your feelings, and yet you do express the ones that are the most important, because you were born with Mars in Virgo, and Mars in Virgo wants to do the right thing, whatever that might be. And it doesn't say that you always do the right thing, but Mars is driven towards the analysis, especially because your Mars in analytical verbal. It's in Verbo. What the fuck? That your Mars in analytical Virgo, trying to make decisions of yes, no, do this, don't do that, why am I doing that? These are all part of the process. Mars is also lined up with the North Node. We're back to the nodes of the moon, which tells me that part of your purpose in this lifetime is to figure out how to do things. Whatever that means, there's something there. Also, I think that Saturn becomes a large part of your work Saturn, the planet of structure, stability. Saturn in your chart, very closely opposite Mercury. In some ways, this can work in a number of different ways. Mercury is how we talk, it's how we communicate, how we listen, how we think, language, how we write. It's opposite Saturn. Saturn is authority. Saturn is the rules. Saturn in opposition to Mercury may be the person who, when they have something to say, it's basic, it's important, it's real. But it also can be the person who's run into authority enough that they feel like whatever they're saying is not important, or that maybe they're not smart enough, or maybe there's almost like everyone else does this easily, but I seem to have to work at it really hard, and therefore I'm going to work really hard at it, and therefore I'm going to do this and get it done. But there's something here about the authority of Saturn and how you can use that in doing things that you do physically in the world. That it's the difference between being talented and not having a skill or a craft versus having a skill and a craft that you've developed through hard work and discipline, and because someone told you you can't do that or you're not good enough. Is any of this making any sense?
Yeah, totally. I have a degree actually of art just down the street at the school here, and pretty much nailing it on the head.
So, and again, I'm just saying what I see. There's also that healing aspect in your chart also. I don't know whether, there's something here about taking or converting some sort of early wound, emotional, physical, spiritual something, and turning it into something that is uplifting and philosophically positive. I see that as a piece in your life. And then I also see the plutonium, which is needed to make a nuclear weapon. And I see this as something that probably, how do I want to say this? I'd much rather be your friend than be your enemy. And I would imagine that with the Libra sun lined up with Venus, that you really don't like the idea of hurting anyone until they pissed you off one too many times, in which case the cyanide goes on the tip of the knife. And again, I'm not saying that you're a nasty or rude or horrible person, but I am saying that there is that undercurrent of darkness that when it gets pushed can come into a self-protection or a protection of those you love, or a, how do I say this gently? Don't fuck with me. And you may not say that until the person's done it one too many times, or after you've said something and then they keep doing it. It's almost like something happens. It's like the bull's neck tightening. In the Ferdinand in the field smelling the daisies and eating the flowers, and then the damn bee coming around. Bzz, bzz, and then eventually the neck muscles tighten and the nose begins to widen and the snort begins to develop until it's like the raging bull. You do have Saturn in Taurus. And I don't think it's an easy place for you to go to. Or maybe I should say, I don't think it's an easy place for you to step back from once you've gone there. But it is a piece. And it's a piece of you that I think that as you move through life, you learn how to work with or lose friends. Does that make sense to you? And for those of you online who may not be able to hear Valentina, it wasn't just a yeah, it was a yeah, totally. Let's see, what else do we have here? I mean, there's a lot of other things that are going on. I do think that right now in your life, my guess is, depending upon how accurate your time of birth is, my guess is that probably maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there was some real major upheaval, change, stuff that was like, where the hell did that come from? And now you're a different direction, different person, and let the record reflect, Your Honor, that the person testifying is nodding yes. But I would also suggest that right now, there's some sort of way in which you want to grow, that something is not quite, you're not quite ready yet. It's like being almost pregnant, and not that I think that pregnant, but it's like it's like there's some aspect of your creativity, your teaching, your self-expression, your production, whatever, that is like ready to happen, and yet circumstances are saying, no, you gotta wait. Nope, not yet. You gotta get this together. You gotta finish this. You gotta do that. There's something that is holding this back just enough to give you more time, although it may not feel like it. It may be frustrating on some level, but it's giving you more time to get it together so that when the resistance falls away, which it will within the next 6 months or so, that you'll be able to take that opportunity that right now might feel like you're fighting up against. Does something ring there at all? Or?
No, you're again right on. It's like I'm working through projects. There was some crazy shit that happened in my life 2 years ago, and it just completely changed the way that I saw my life and how I progressed from that point.
Yeah. And again, I don't know if people online can hear that, but the answer was yes. Yeah, thank you. Hope that made some sense. All right, we're now going to pull one more out of the proverbial hat. All right, and let's see what hath the gods wrought. Monyi, is that? Did I say that okay? Monyi.
Yeah, perfect.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And let's get that one entered, and this is March 20th, 1996, and 12:25 p.m., 12:25 p.m. Oh, the doctor must have loved you for that. He's going, I want to go to lunch. I want to get out of here and go to lunch. No, got to do this first. And another, oh, this is interesting. All three people today were born local after my whole discussion about no one is really from here. So much for that theory. And Manyi, do you know your chart at all? Have you looked at your chart?
Yeah.
What's your favorite thing about your chart? Don't tell me that it's yours.
I really love my Venus Taurus.
Okay, so when we look at Manyi's chart, first of all, we can see that there's a whole grouping of planets of Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Sun, Moon, all at the end of Pisces on through Aries. And Venus is kind of ahead of the whole pack off in Taurus. Now remember, Venus is at home in Taurus. And I would imagine that what that Venus in Taurus offers, and when I asked Manyi what's her favorite thing in her chart, she said Venus in Taurus. And I would imagine that it's your favorite thing for two astrological reasons. Number one, the rest of your chart is either, it's more dynamic and confusing at the same time. With planets in Pisces that are kind of fuzzy. There's a Mars-Saturn conjunction in Pisces. This goes back to something I said earlier about bad charts. Saturn-Mars conjunctions are bad. No, not at all. They're just hard to figure out how to work with. But once you do, man, you're in, because Mars is hot, Saturn's cold. In your chart, they're in the same place. Mars says, let's go, hit the gas. Saturn says, no, I ain't going anywhere, hit the brake. And so this yes, no, hot, cold, do it, don't do it, gas, brake is way more immediate than Thea's Jupiter, Saturn, which is also that same dynamic, but it's more bigger, smaller. It's a different level. The Mars Saturn is like right here, right now. Yes, no, do it, don't do it, go for it, don't go for it, hot, cold. And it never goes away. But it's the kind of thing that when one can master that energy, then this can be the sign of a ninja, you know, of an athlete, of a performer who's worked with the hot cold enough to really master that nuance. And what's intriguing is that I would imagine that you not air like as fire, earth, air, water, but as do it right. Nope, I fucked up. It was an error. Air. It's not, sounds like air and air are the same, but they're not. Okay, sorry, language. I would imagine though that you err on the side of the Mars, do it, and then suffer the consequence of having to either pull back or, and I say that for two reasons, is that Mars comes, the conjunction is close. They're very close together. They're like less than 1 degree apart. And Mars comes first, which means that when anything comes through the sky, it lines up with your Mars, either directly by conjunction or opposition or square or whatever angle, but it lines up with your Mars and it says gas. And then it lines up with your Saturn and it says, oh shit, I should have hit the brake. And so it's hot then cold for you. And on top of that, I think though that the Mars is useful because your sun and moon, you were born just a day and a half after a new moon. And so you have that new moon energy of Aries, of needing to be a pioneer, do it first, start something. I mean, I see your chart as someone who is a fire starter, but you have a Cancer rising, which basically says, I don't like fire, I don't like starting anything, just can I stay home and sip tea and sit under the covers, not answer the phone, not see who's at the door, I don't want anyone to see me, I'll just put on my Harry Potter invisibility cloak and no one will know that I'm really kind of pissed off at them or fiery or have this to offer or whatever. And into that complexity comes Venus in Taurus that just says, I just want things to be simple. That's why you like Venus and Taurus. Oh, I said there were two reasons. That's reason one. Reason two is because Venus in Taurus is very closely trining. That's 1/3 of a circle. Think of an equilateral triangle that's harmonious. Your Venus in Earth Taurus is trining Jupiter in Earth Capricorn, which is basically suggesting that when that Venus is in operation, you're expansive. You're getting what it is that you need or want. Again, going back to the good bad of ancient astrology or traditional astrology, it would say, this is an interesting chart because the Saturn-Mars conjunction sucks, but the Jupiter-Venus, remember Saturn and Mars are malefics traditionally. Well, benefics are Venus and Jupiter. And your Venus and Jupiter are harmonizing with one another, and that's like the ultimate blessing. Kinda. Because it does mean that sometimes you can probably get away with working less than someone else and still get the goodies. You're the one that wins. You're the one that somehow gets what you want because that Venus is getting harmonized by the Jupiter. And yes, on one level it's a blessing. On another level, it's also like a cosmic license to be lazy. Not that you are, because you have the Mars Saturn conjunction also that's working. Now, I would suggest that right now you're on the edge of like very important stuff coming off of a few years that may have been rather confusing and I don't want to say unsettling, maybe very spiritually opportunistic. But it's almost like you were sailing along and all of us in your clipper ship, and all of a sudden the wind stopped blowing. And Neptune is the culprit here because over the past few years, Neptune has lined up with your Mars and your Saturn, kind of confusing that part of you where you're normally working the gas and the brake and the gas and the brake, the Saturn and the Mars. And Neptune is just barely moving past that point now, but it's coming very close to your sun, which can be even more confusing and or even more spiritually creative. And I think that the goal here is to stay aware of the idea that you don't need to be heading toward a goal in the three-dimensional world to be getting something valuable out of this point in your life. It's like I'm going back to the old clipper ships. When they crossed the equator, they went through the doldrums where the winds didn't blow. And they sometimes would just float for days, even weeks, no wind in the sails. Now, if you're trying to get, back to England, or wherever, or to wherever it is you're going, that can be frustrating as hell. But, if you're really just on the ship and you're keeping a diary and writing the great American novel or Moby Dick or whatever, all of a sudden you got time. And I'm not saying that you have that time, but I am saying that in some ways this can be an incredibly powerful and magical spiritual time, but it's hard to separate the dream from the reality. And that's okay, because it will eventually crystallize back into Saturnian stuff. And what's real, again, if you think of Neptune as the planet that creates the dream realm, which is the imaginary scaffolding upon which we build our life, it's not important that you get to the trading center to cash in your chips yet. You're floating for a bit. Does it make sense a little bit?
Yeah. I feel like I've been having a lot of feelings as someone who's a freelance artist. And so I think the direction of where my work has been going has been maybe stepping into some spiritual parts of my life. And I think that's helping me really figure out where I'm supposed to be going in my career.
Yeah, I think that also, thank you for sharing that. And I think that also you're getting a strong, what's the right word, hit, punch, motivation from Pluto, which is, has just come across your Neptune and still kind of heading toward your Uranus at early degrees of Aquarius, and it's sextile your Sun at 0 degrees of Aries. And so there's real power in what's going on right now that may feel like you're in the Bardo states, which in the Tibetan mythology are the states after death and before birth. And so you're in, which is more that Neptunian, Plutonian kind of never land, that something has kind of disintegrated or ended, but the new life has not yet materialized. And it's what you do at this point that's going to have way more impact in a year or 2 or 3 down the road than you might realize. Make sense? Thank you. And thank you all. What kind of art do you do?
I do everything from illustration to sculpture, so a little bit of everything.
Got it. And Valentina, what kind of art do you do?
Mostly illustration.
Got it. You can give me a pencil, a compass, and a straight edge, and I can't make a circle or a straight line. However, I can take that pencil and I can describe it better than anyone. Gemini rising. Thank you all for coming. I hope to see you next month. It'll be November 1st. It'll actually be on the 1st of November, is the first Friday. And thank you all. And I hope that was of use to not only those of you who we chose, but others, even though we didn't have the pictures. We'll have a computer that works with pictures again for next month. And for those of you who are on my $3 a month Patreon, there'll be a mid-month update that'll drill down a little bit more on the upcoming election. And obviously when we're here next month, November 1st, that's probably going to be a topic of urgency and concern. And so that'll be interesting then. And I would also mention that for those of you who are so inclined, if you haven't gotten the mailing or notification through one of my social media, I'm doing a talk for ESAR, that's the International Society for Astrological Research, and that's going to be at noon Pacific time on Sunday. And you can go to ISAR Astrology, ISAR astrology.com, and there's links about that. And I'm going to be doing an hour-and-a-half presentation on harmonic aspects and how to use them and what they are. So that's it for now. Thank you all. Thank you for those of you online who have stuck it out. And we'll see you again. Thank you. And I'm going to end the stream.